Okay, take 40. Done this about every way I know how to do it. Gonna try to do a little bit of order this time. Got some stuff. I never plan anything that I say, so I just kind of ramble on. So we got try to do it with some order this time. Anyways, today trying to tell you about rods. Get a lot of questions on them. A lot of people don't understand the correlation between the action, the power, and the length of rods. So I'm gonna do my best to explain the three, how they help, what kind of situations you need to use them for. So anyways, start off with length, kind of a preference deal. I'm tall, I'm 6'3", so I use a longer rod on average than most people. My go-to rod for like skipping docks, throwing chatterbait, stuff like that, is a 7'3" medium heavy fast. It's like my number one rod. If I could only use one rod all year, that's definitely the one I would have. I think most pros would agree with that. 7'3" medium heavy fast is a pretty versatile rod. It's a very, very nice rod for kind of getting away with everything. But that's my rod for skipping, jigs, stuff like that. And then obviously a frog, I go longer. Crankbaits, I usually go shorter. For shallow crankbaits, deep crankbaits, I go longer. But anyways, action of a rod. The action is what the rod looks like when it's loaded. So that's how much tip it has. So basically a fast action rod gets to the backbone fast. A moderate rod gets to the backbone moderate. And a slow rod gets to the backbone very slow. So all the way down by the reel handle, the rod's still going to bend a lot. So basically, this is a fast action rod. It's only going to bend up here in the tip. You can see how it kind of bends more right there. You get this cranking rod. So this is a slower rod. You can see when I touch the tip, it's going to bend all the way down to here, just on bending the tip. So that's the difference in action. Action is the amount of tip the rod has. Power, and obviously power is like light, medium, medium heavy, heavy, extra heavy. That's the amount of force it takes to load the rod. So a medium action rod is not going to take too much force. A heavy action rod is going to take a lot of force to load that rod fully. Now, every rod should load about the same. If you got a crankbait rod or a punching rod, whenever you really got that rod loaded and you're reeling the fish to the boat, it should flex pretty much down to the reel handle, pretty much down to the reel seat. I mean, so like you can see whenever I'm flipping this wood and stuff, I'm using a 7'6" heavy fast rod. Whenever I'm reeling the fish in, it loads just like a crankbait rod. The difference is it takes more force to load that. So a crankbait rod, basically, I call it a crankbait rod. It's a 7 foot. This right here is a 7 foot medium cranking rod. Medium is the power. Cranking is the action. So basically, has a moderate action tip, and the reason for that is this bait is super, super light. This is made out of balsa. It's very light. It's hard to cast with like a medium heavy rod. You got to use a lot of arm movement to cast this rod, to cast that bait with a medium heavy fast. With this medium cranking rod, just a little bit of wrist movement, that rod really loads and propels that bait far away from the boat. And with a crankbait, a long cast is extra important. So basically, you got to figure, if you cast this bait 30 foot, just say you cast it 30 foot and it lands. You unwrap it a little. Okay, it's going to take it 10 foot to dig all the way down to max depth. This is a DT6. So you cast it 30 foot, 10 foot of your cast is wasted. Then you got 10 foot on the bottom, and the last 10 foot is coming back up to the boat. So now using the correct rod and reel and line, you cast this bait 100 foot, takes 10 foot to dig, you got 90 foot on the bottom, or 70 foot on the bottom. Just say 15 foot to dig, 70 foot on the bottom, then 15 foot come back to the boat. So you really, the most important thing with crankbaits is being able to cast it out there. The other day I was fishing and there was a tree. It wasn't a long cast, but if I landed this far from the tree, the bait would get down deep enough, had enough time, and I hit this one single rock in the current, and I hit it 4 times in a row, caught a fish 4 times in a row. And if I landed 2 feet short of that tree, the crankbait didn't get down in time and hit that rock. So it's super important. Now, one thing that I hate about the fishing industry is all these companies want you to think that you need this rod, you need a 7'2" medium heavy fast for a jig. You can't throw a jig on anything else. You need this crankbait rod. You can't throw a crankbait on anything else. But you can definitely get away with using a general rod like a 7 foot medium heavy fast for almost everything. I did it whenever I was younger. I had 4 or 5 rods. They were all 7 foot medium heavy fast. I used them for punching, crankbaits, deep diving crankbaits, everything. And I lost some fish. I didn't catch as many fish as I would with perfect rods, but you can get away with that a lot easier than you can. Like a crankbait rod, you can't throw a jig on. You can't get the hook in past the barb. So that's the deal with crankbait rods. They're usually a slower action and lighter power rods. Now this right here is a jerkbait rod. you can see this jerkbait has extremely small hooks. This is a Mega Bass Vision 110 Plus, and basically this is my jerkbait rod. A little bit longer than most people's. It's a 7-foot medium fast. It's not a crankbait rod. Crankbait rod would be a medium moderate. So this is a fast action rod. The reason I use that is whenever I'm jerking that bait, the fast action gives that bait a cleaner jerk. If it's a slower, more moderate rod, the rod's going to load more. Whenever I jerk that bait, it's going to not have such a sharp jerk to it. So you want to use a fast action rod for a jerkbait always. Same thing with throwing a rattle trap in grass. See people a lot using a cranking rod for throwing a rattle trap in grass, and whenever you snatch it out of the grass, you're not going to get as clean of a jerk and free that bait up, you know, as good with a slow rod. With a fast action rod, you can really transfer the energy to the bait and snatch it out of that grass in just a short little burst. So for a jerkbait, stuff like that, you want to use something with a light power but a fast action. So you don't want to have something super heavy rods you're going to bend the hooks out with. Now, this is another one of my go-to rods. This is a 7'3" medium heavy fast, and this is a jig I have tied on it. This is a Big Money Baits rubber jig right here. But basically, you can't use a moderate rod for this, and the reason for it is when you set the hook, you got to compress this weed guard and get that hook in past the barb all at once. So if you have a rod that loads a lot, you're going to lose energy on your hook set, and you can't do both at the same exact time. So I use a 7'3". You don't need like an 8-foot super fast rod for a jig, but you do need something that when you set the hook, it's going to move some line and put some force into that big hook. Now, this is my go-to rod, 7'3", medium heavy fast. That's what I use for a lot of things. I use it for a chatterbait as well. Let me grab this right here. Now, this is a very controversial topic. Chatterbait, a lot of pros use a glass rod because they think whenever a fish eats a chatterbait, it folds the blade back in the mouth like this. And whenever you set the hook with a fast action rod, it really blows that blade out and blows the fish's mouth open and makes you lose the fish. Now, I don't believe that. I think whenever they eat it most of the time, it's going to be like this, and they eat it, and it's got a jig hook in it, a big hook. And so I want to have a rod that can drive that hook. So even if they do eat it like this, I think that you're going to, when you set the hook, it's going to move it forward and start digging instantly. So I don't ascribe to that using a glass rod for a chatterbait. I don't like it, don't like the way it casts, don't like the way it skips. I would just much rather use my go-to rod, 7'3", for that. Now, this is a flipping rod right here. This is the one I use for a lot of stuff. I use it for a frog, use it for flipping wood, and use it for punching hydrilla. So basically, this is a 7'6" heavy fast. And just like all the rest of them, you can see whenever I'm throwing a frog or flipping wood, whenever I'm really loaded, reeling those fish to the boat, you'll see the rod loaded all the way down by the reel handle. But on the hook set, it takes a lot of power to load that rod. So on the hook set, I really drive the hook. Whenever you're punching grass, using braided line, heavy weight, and I'll show you this snail knot right here. Whenever you set the hook, you need 3 things to happen whenever you're punching grass. You need this snail knot to work like this and pop that hook out. You need to rip a hole in the fish in the grass. So whenever you're using braid, you set the hook, you need a lot of energy transfer to the hook set because it rips a hole in the grass and frees the stuff so the fish can actually have an alleyway to get out. And this is a pretty big hook with a big barb on it. So you need to do you need a heavy action rod. A moderate rod is not going to do all 3 of those things. It's not going to get this hook in past the barb, make that snail knot work, and rip the grass. So you need something that's really fast action and heavy. But at the same time, a rod that's built correctly is still going to load down here. So it's going to take a lot of force to get it to load, but it's still going to load down here whenever you're pulling the fish out, so you won't rip a big hole in the fish's mouth and lose it. Now, spinning rods, always use the same thing. Like a 7', 7'1", 7'2", medium light. All my spinning rod hooks, all this is correlated to the hook. So the size of the hook, it dictates the size of the rod. You notice that the lighter action rods and the slower action rods and the lighter power rods all use hooks like this. So this is a medium power, fast action rod. Use that real slight hook, small, thin wire hook, because you need that rod to load whenever you set the hook so that you don't bend that hook out or rip a hole in the fish's mouth. Same thing with the crankbait rod, same thing. You want to match the right rod to the right hook. That's the biggest part of everything, because you want to be able to get that hook in past the barb with the lightest rod you can, but you want to get it past the barb every single time. But you want the lighter rod because it loads better, you'll lose less fish. Now, spinning rods, always use hooks like this, super light wire, so I always use a lighter power rod. Now, like a 7'6", heavy fast, I throw a frog on it like this, and you gotta do 2 things whenever you throw this frog. First, you gotta be able to cast it, so I use a fast action, It helps me. I like the way it loads. For me, it just casts better. I can cast a long way with a 7'6". But whenever you set the hook on it, you got to compress this frog and get both those hooks in past the barb. That's not an easy thing to do. With a moderate rod, you're not going to be able to do all that at once. You got to compress this and get that dug in. And you want that energy from the hook set to be transferred. So you don't want that rod to load a lot. Now, same thing, punching grass. Use this big giant hook like this. This is a big hook. You need something that's got a heavy power and a fast action to drive this hook home. But go over it one more time. The crankbaits like this, thin wire hooks, need something light. It's all about mix and matching, understanding exactly what all the components of a rod do to help to match it to the right hook. It's more about the hook than anything else, because the hook's what you got to get in and keep in that fish's mouth. Now, I use a longer rod. I'm tall, 6'3". My normal rod is 7'3", medium heavy fast. And just say you have a 7-foot rod, that's a medium heavy fast. So basically you're going to have X amount of tip, X amount of inches of backbone, and X amount of inches of handle. Now make that a 7'6" rod. Now you got 2 more inches of tip, 3 more inches of backbone, and 1 more inch of handle. That's more of the rod that can load, and the more rod loads, the more fish you're going to get to the boat. So I like to use longer rods in general. I got a bunch of friends of mine who are even short, 5'8", 5'10", less than 6 foot, use long rods for roll casting down the bank. You just got to get used to it. You'll lose less fish. A lot of the guys that I know that throw a frog that lose the least amount of fish, we all throw a 7'6" heavy, every one of us. So a lot of people say throw it on 7 foot. I don't believe it. I think you throw it on a 7'6". You don't throw it on a super stout rod that's going to rip big holes in the fish's mouth. You want the rod to load, but you want to get that hook in, and that long rod really loads up and keeps those fish pegged. So I think that's about everything for rods. Hope I didn't forget anything. I've done this so many times. I forget something every time or cut my head off in the shot. But anyways, if you learned anything at all from that, leave a like, leave a comment, hit that sub button, share this video if you want to teach anybody anything about rods. I'm going to maybe do a reel one, tell you what, but that's super simple. Reels are kind of overrated. But anyways, rods, hopefully that'll help you buying out a rod for Christmas, and see y'all.